Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy, DBiddles. Welcome back once again to the Brick Edition. Now I've done 2 of these already, hopefully you've tuned in for them, but here's the need-to-knows. Normally on my main video series, Chatbots, I assemble a Japanese plastic mecha model, and while I do that, I talk about that mecha, and also if I know what I'm doing, which, let's face it, I rarely do, I tie that mecha into a broader theme or idea from the real world, and this process lasts about 40 or more minutes. But in the Brick Edition, I assemble a robot or mecha out of Brand X interlocking construction bricks, and I fire off 1 or more shorter thoughts that aren't enough for a full Chatbots episode. I have some full Chatbots episodes I want to put out after this, but rest assured, the Brick Edition isn't going away. For now though, let's get brickety-brickety-bricked. So just a couple years ago, comic writer Al Ewing wrote a series entitled The Immortal Hulk for Marvel, and it was, without hyperbole, one of the finest modern mainstream ongoing superhero titles I've read in a long time. I read a lot of comics month to month, and they're always a little bit of a mixed bag. Some are good, some are just okay, some could be really great if they smoothed out a couple things, and some you just read because you're a devoted follower of that particular IP, even though the current run is pretty weak. But during the Immortal Hulk's 50-plus issue run, I was enthralled issue to issue by this single title more than any other comic I was reading at the time. And there were some real doozies like Hellblazer and Second Coming and Ultra Mega and Superman Smashes the Klan. The one major negative was that the series' main penciler, the hugely talented Joe Bennett, whose work really brought to life the grotesque and surreal horrors of the Hulk and his journey, turned out to be an alt-right weirdo and outspoken anti-Semite. It sucks, but sometimes people who make cool art turn out to be garbage people. The final issue of Immortal Hulk marked the end of his career in mainstream comics. Anyways, you can imagine my excitement to hear that Ewing intends to outdo himself in the upcoming series, Immortal Thor. Now, I'm not normally a Thor guy, but Ewing has earned enough goodwill to sell me on this series sight unseen, so if my opinion means anything to you, maybe give it a look-see. So hey, we already know that Joe Brandon and the Big Orange Dump are running for president in 2024, and so too is Meatball Rob DeSanctimonious, whom I'm hoping will disrupt the GOP voting base just enough that none of the red team can pull together a winning campaign. You know, assuming that the system doesn't start accidentally holding rich people accountable and put old Donnie T out of the running with a set of prison bars. Now let's get one thing straight. Your old pal DBiddles don't like none of these people. Unlike the fascists, sorry, I flipped over a couple pages at once in my script. Unlike the conservatives, I don't make demagogues or idols out of my politicians. And unlike the liberals, I don't think the Democrats have our best interests at heart. I'm under no illusions that any of these people are working towards the benefit of the common man, most especially those most marginalized among us. We've seen the Dems fumble the ball every goddamn time they get it, and it's not exactly looking like an accident anymore whenever there's a turnover 5 yards from the goal line. Now, even if you gathered up the small handful of politicians that I think align most closely with my beliefs and gave them the nomination, I'm under no illusion that a successful Sanders-Cortez or Sanders-Omar campaign would lead to some kind of grand socio-economic reform here in the US. I get it. Voting for someone who advocates for what you want doesn't mean they'll actually do it. Our democracy isn't broken, it's working exactly as intended. And it's intended to keep the powerful people on top and all the rest of us toiling for crumbs and fighting each other so that we never work together. I'll point you to the fact that despite what the cable news will tell you, Joe Biden hasn't done all that much to alter the immigration policy of our southern border, and despite him making a big stink about it on the campaign trail, we still have migrant children in cages. A lot of lefties have started discouraging voting and decrying electoralism as ineffective in facilitating our actual political goals. Which, admittedly, it kind of is. Again, the machine isn't built to produce results that favor the average citizen, it's built to keep feeding the rich at the expense of the poor. Even if you elect the person who made all those cool promises that you like, when it comes time to make good, they can just turn around and say, no, don't wanna now. Or else, oh drat, there's one or two guys who are just suddenly being sticks in the mud now for seemingly no reason and totally blocking our cool new policy. Darn, guess we can't fulfill those campaign promises. Man, I really wanted to. I can understand why all of you would like to think this voting thing is stupid. But comrades, if you're listening to this, I need for all of you to move real close to your speakers and turn the volume up. This is very important, so I need your full, undivided attention, and I really need you to hear every syllable of this sentence. You ready? You still have to fucking vote, goddammit! Not because it gets us closer to a more democratic and egalitarian system, but because it forestalls and delays further descent into unfettered capitalism and brutal authoritarianism. I know that a certain amount of desperation and pressure is necessary to push the politically unaligned and inactive towards acting, towards solidarity. A populace that is too secure and comfortable will not be discontent enough to act. I get that. And I get that we already live in a pretty dystopian, pretty nightmarish hell world where the odds are against us. But at the same time, there are lots of vulnerable people that will get hurt if the fascists... I'm sorry, wrong page again. There will be a lot of vulnerable people who will get hurt if the Republicans get back into office. You think things are bad now. They can always get worse. They can always get worse. Way fucking worse. We all thought Hillary was a lock in 2016, myself included. Why bother voting, I thought. There's no way this absolute goon could win. Look how that worked out. What could possibly go wrong? I don't know, this is just off the top of my head. How about the botched handling of a global pandemic leading to over 1 million deaths in the US alone? I'm just spitballing here, but how about the appointment of 3 Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade? How about the ramping up of extreme transphobia leading to a prolonged campaign of near-genocidal policies being written specifically to harm trans folk? Those people don't live in the long term of your plans for glorious revolution, comrade. Every trans healthcare bill and don't say gay bill and stop woke act is another inch the walls close in. I myself just got done setting an alert on my phone for a special election to help ensure that we don't need a 60% supermajority to pass constitutional amendments in my state. And the main reason the Republicans in my state are trying to pass this is to tank any pro-choice amendments. Vote no on Issue 1, August 8th. So listen up, accelerationists. If you're ready to go, if you've already completely organized, if you've got the day marked on your calendar for when we start firebombing state buildings and bringing down the bourgeoisie, great, cool, let's fucking go. But if you don't have that date marked, if you aren't ready to start lining up the decadent capitalist pigs for the guillotine, if all you've got is a bunch of big talk on social media instead of community gardens, or a worker co-op, or a political action committee, or a green energy grid, or a plan of attack, or an armed anti-fascist militia, if you don't even know your fucking neighbors or first aid training, shut the fuck up and keep pulling the goddamn levers. Posting memes isn't praxis, dummy, and neither is telling people not to fucking vote. Because actual fascists will vote every time, and they'll do everything they can to get others to vote in line with them. Actual fascists use the machine to their advantage while also organizing in real life. They get people all riled up on God, guns, and glory, and then they storm the Target and harass employees over the Pride display. They cut anti-union propaganda, all while getting on their phones and posting 1 billion memes about God Emperor Trump. They bust people out to polling places to vote against dumb shit boogeymen like CRT. They terrorize and propagandize and redistrict, and all while voting for people who will make all the psycho shit they advocate for legal, so that they can do psycho shit without fear of reprisal. They have no lives because all they have in their hearts is hate. Hate for the woke corporations whom they boycott, and hate for the people who live the lives they wish they could. They only have to occasionally win to gain ground, while we have to win all the time to keep from losing ground. Voting isn't enough, but it is still necessary. So if you're ready to go, let's fucking hear it. What's your master plan, Guevara? I'm ready to do a Bastille Day if you are. Or are you just trying to be aloof and cool and disinterested about how much the status quo is strangling you while hoping someone else will break the chains of the working man for you? Stop fucking sabotaging yourselves, morons. Alright. Next topic. Hey, so, Harry Potter. I've mentioned a couple times before about how J.K. Rowling has decided to use all the power, wealth, and influence from her multi-billion-dollar fantasy creations to attack some of the most vulnerable and unfairly maligned people out there, while also signal-boosting literal goddamn Nazis. And meanwhile, her wizarding world is chugging along, business as usual. Apparently, the most recent news out of Hogwarts is that Warner Discovery intends to reboot their adaptations of the original Harry Potter books into a streaming series, since apparently the Fantastic Beasts aren't provoking the same level of excitement that the corporate overlords had hoped for. Now, the recent release of the Hogwarts Legacy video game demonstrated that despite the massive controversy surrounding the property, this product still has legs if they can run it right. And you better believe they want to run with it as long as they can, as to date, it's pulled in $34.5 billion as a franchise. Now, I myself have never been a Potter puppet pal. My mom was one of those people who back in the day heard the phrase witchcraft and wizardry, and her mind immediately came to the conclusion that me reading these books or watching these movies would result in me taking up Satanism as a hobby, because Christians would rather blame all their problems on Satan than go to therapy. By the time I was old enough to do what I wanted, I didn't really have much interest in Harry Potter anymore, and instead opted to find my own path to worshipping the Dark Lord via comic books, anime, heavy metal, video games, and pornography. And based on the personal trajectory of Rowling herself, it seems I made the better choice. Hail Satan! So anyways, I don't actually give a shit about any of this Potter stuff on its own. I was in no danger of being a bad ally when everyone was making a big stink about boycotting Hogwarts Legacy, and I was similarly disappointed, though somewhat unsurprised, when Dogfart's Pregnancy ended up selling very well despite that big stink. Rowling has explicitly stated that she views the continued success of the Potter brand as validation for all her shitty, hateful rhetoric. And since, like I said, that success showed the Warner execs that people still like the Potter stuff, they intend to press forward with developing more Potter products despite the controversy. So, if we were to take this brand down a peg, maybe it gives Rowling a blow to her ego, maybe she shuts up about the transphobia, maybe the big media execs who bankroll a lot of her stuff stop pushing it and move on to something else, and maybe Rowling loses relevance altogether. I mean, after all, nobody really cares what Kevin Sorbo has to say about trans people, even though he is a hateful reactionary creep. Because Kevin Sorbo's just a has-been that nobody cares about anymore. Even the people who agree with Sorbo don't give that much of a shit what he thinks. Kevin Sorbo's just mad at queer people because the only thing he's known for is a TV show from 30 years ago that was outperformed by, and less fondly remembered than, its own sister show that featured Lucy Lawless and her character's lesbian girlfriend. Sorbo's just mad that the queer community showed him up on the single thing that he had going for him. Now, I get why the trans community and their most outspoken allies were pretty upset in the lead up to Bogshart Smegmacy. In case you haven't heard, trans people are the current favorite punching bag of the fascists. Sorry, these stupid pages just won't stop sticking together. The current favorite punching bag of the Republicans, who are all just giddily dreaming up new ways to make the already hard lives of trans folk even harder, either by cutting agitprop that calls every trans person a pedophile, or by passing restrictive laws that don't explicitly target trans people, but disproportionately harm trans people. So I totally understand the desire to generate a social media campaign to woke scold normies into not buying the Dog Barks Emergency video game. After all, most normies aren't paying attention to the state-level legislation being cut on a day-to-day basis, and most of them don't know who Matt Walsh is either. If you could successfully sabotage this video game's financial success, you could damage the reputation and confidence of the most mainstream voice for transphobia. And obviously, that didn't happen. But if I could be the obnoxious cishet guy trying to authoritatively speak on LGBT issues for just a second, might I suggest that there might be a better tactic to implement in the future? As we keep trying to tell all our grandparents who are just so upset about M&Ms and Bud Light, consumer boycotts don't often work, and when they do, they usually need some big unifying grievance that even the most uninformed and casual consumer can be affected by. Most average folks don't pay attention to current events, unless Luke Skywalker makes a cameo. Trans people have to be paying attention. They have to be invested in the poor performance of Potter shit because their lives are on the line. And when they start pointing and shouting at this stupid video game to everyone who will listen, the average person, who may or may not actually be otherwise totally sympathetic to the plight of trans people, just look up from their Twitter feed and say, "Hey, that shiny new video game sure looks fun." It's pretty indicative of how mired in capitalism we all are when the best anyone can come up with for political advocacy and activism is either buying or not buying particular consumer goods. And when all the desperate pleas from trans allies go unheard and Pig Pimple Pedigree sells 12 million copies, all the people who are active transphobes get to have a smug laugh about it all. But you know what does seem to cut through the noise to get the attention of your average inattentive median voter consumer? Memes and trolling. Memes and trolling are enjoyed by everyone, regardless of demographic, and they kinda just slide right into the input socket of the brain without that much thought. From all reports, Higgledy Piggledy was actually a pretty garbage video game that, if left alone, might not have sold as well after some early consumer reviews had stamped out some of the enthusiasm for the wait-and-see type customers. And a lot of good criticisms and digs have been come up with over the years to take the piss out of the Potter franchise as a whole. Now with this reboot of the beloved film series looming on the horizon, and a streaming series no less, the best course of action might be coming up with some good zingers to really rain on the parade once it airs. Because a lot of Potter fans are going to be reflexively judging the new series quite harshly now that all the actors that they knew and loved are no longer involved in the telling of this story. Like, you know how there's all those people who get all mopey at the suggestion that someone other than Hugh Jackman is eventually going to have to be the new Wolverine? Yeah, imagine that same energy for Emma Watson or Daniel Radcliffe, for the roles that launched their careers. Imagine that same energy for roles played by beloved, now deceased actors like Alan Rickman or Robbie Coltrane. Just imagine all the stupid changes they're going to have to make to this story to update it for streaming in 2024. Imagine them setting this story in the 80s so that nobody has to have smartphones at Hogwarts, and how there will be all this licensed music and cringy fan service memes added to the story. Imagine having to take Quidditch seriously again, now that we've all grown up enough to realize that its rules are even stupider and more nonsensical than Duel Monsters was in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Imagine having to write a new and interesting take on a premise that Rowling basically copied from the Discworld series and Neil Gaiman's Books of Magic, a premise that has since been copied by basically every other anime that comes out anymore. You get me? Do to Harry Potter what was done to Morbius. Even if it doesn't work, being a dispassionate smug fuck doesn't sting as bad as being a hysterical crying activist who lost. Just a suggestion. So that's your solution, DBiddles? Picking on people for liking stuff? I thought you said that tweets weren't activism. Oh, you think you got me with this one, huh? Well, let me address those points one at a time. For point number the first, I don't mind people liking Harry Potter, even if Rowling is a crazy turf bitch, and even if there's some themes and ideas in there that are kind of weird and gross. For me to do so would make me a massive hypocrite, as I've made a lot of my interests well known, and it's not like everything I like is the most perfectly enlightened or progressive stuff either. I think it's perfectly okay to be against murder in principle, but also enjoy watching fantasy murders happen in like Freddy Krueger films, or Ninja Scroll, or Demolition Man, or whatever. I think the billionaire class are gross and cringe, but I still like Scrooge McDuck and Batman. Living in an imperfect society, it's only natural that we will produce art and entertainment that reflects that, and sometimes the attitudes towards those imperfections will themselves be imperfect. It's just important to recognize it as imperfect and not buy into the fantasy of those narratives. We all recognize that slicing up teenagers with blade gloves isn't appropriate real-world behavior, so we can extend that to not simping for the ultra-wealthy, no matter how cool their Batmobiles are. I also happen to think that noted racist H.P. Lovecraft and noted pedophile Nobuhiro Watsuki are both really gross individuals who believe or do bad things. And yet I still love the Cthulhu mythos and Rurouni Kenshin. I'd just rather not give money to people who actively do those gross things. So if I wanted to get any more Rurouni Kenshin stuff, I'd probably try to get it secondhand or acquire it through alternative channels. But obviously, where you draw the line for that is going to be arbitrary at best. I don't like child slavery, but I still buy and use electronics made with cobalt mined by children, and I still consume foods with vanilla harvested by children. The whole no ethical consumption under capitalism means we're all really damned if you do, damned if you don't. And while that's not really an excuse or anything, I think taking down one franchise primarily driven by a single creative voice who is actively engaging in deliberate malice is feasibly accomplishable. Certainly more so than dismantling the systems for exploitive labor and profit. After all, sexual abuse probably still happens all the time in Hollywood, but nobody's working with Harvey Weinstein anymore. And nobody's publishing comics with Joe Bennett's art anymore. Hey, remember Joe Bennett from the start of this video? And as for memes and trolling being an effective strategy, well, let's just look at the facts here for a second. Not succeeding in the disempowerment of the Potter franchise is not likely to make things any worse. Rowling is already rich as dog shit, Warner Discovery is too, no amount of activism is going to change that, and they'll always be rich and famous, with or without more Potter sales. The most militant transphobes will always be transphobes, and a slight level of transphobia is already the base default for most people anyways. There's material consequences for certain politicians gaining office, and the Democrats aren't going to suddenly stop running terrible candidates just because they lose a couple elections. Mostly because the conservative base just wants to crown their presidents as Sultan for life. So there's actually stakes in losing elections. But there's not really a threat with already scummy, ingrained prejudice taking a long time to work through. Even if most people probably don't hate trans folks, they probably have hurtful misconceptions about them already. Appealing to the morality of those in privilege is a long-term process. That's why all those impassioned TikToks calling for the boycott of the video game didn't work. But giving people a little bit of a ribbing, a little bit of peer pressure for liking this kind of cringe franchise might put a little bit of a damper on their enthusiasm. How many of you were still stuck on some children's show like Barney or Blue's Clues or Dora or Peppa Pig at age 7, but then some kid in your second grade class was like, "Lol, you still like that baby shit?" And then you kind of felt ashamed about liking it and started distancing yourself from that thing. Or how many times do you see a movie that you kind of like until some professional reviewer shits all over it? And, you gotta admit they make some good points, so then you change your opinion on it. I remember in the late aughts, everyone, myself included, was making it their unofficial job to rip on people for liking the Twilight series. And that was probably a little unfair of us. Was Twilight stupid and cringe and terrible? Sure. Was most of that spite due to the fact that it was a thing that mostly adolescent girls were into, and that equally cringe things enjoyed by teenage boys tend to get more of a pass for some reason? Probably. Are there still people who unironically like the Twilight series despite its many flaws that everyone was all too eager to point out? Yes. But was a lot of the enthusiasm tapered down due to everyone shitting on it? Are there a lot of people who used to really like Twilight who are now either lukewarm or done with it entirely because of all those people who were dunking on it back in the day? Abso-fucking-lutely. And this new Harry Potter show is going to be just so vulnerable due to high expectations. How many people who intended to watch the new Velma show never ended up watching the new Velma show because it got shat on just so fucking hard? Or maybe they started watching it and then they cut their charitability in giving it a new chance way down because everyone else who watched it first gave it such an overwhelmingly negative response. Hands up from this guy, I might have actually completed the first season of Velma if everyone wasn't in unison taking big, loud, chunky diarrhea shits on it from the jump. Is that technically bullying? Yeah. But so too would be giving a Klansman titty twisters. But that doesn't mean I don't think he'd deserve it. And I'm not even saying to do that much in this particular instance, just that you be a little smug with some liberally applied criticism of what will very possibly be a stupid and bad show. Oh, the wizard show written by this stupid has-been author turned out bad? Lol, imagine liking Harry Potter. L+ ratio, Giga Chad face. All I'm asking you to do is help turn J.K. Rowling into Kevin Sorbo. Or better yet, into Joe Bennett, by making fun of all the merch and media that is connected to her stupid British isekai story. People make fun of isekai shows all the time without the benefit of doing it to fight transphobia. So, added bonus this time. Just make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. The cast and crew probably do not deserve harassment. At least not until they get on Twitter and say something like, "Oh, absolutely I support J.K. Rowling. I signed up to play Lord Voldemort specifically because I believe in eliminating all these filthy degenerates from society." At that point, fire away. And if it works, be prepared for Rowling to start whining on Twitter about how she's being attacked for her free speech and how she's the victim for advocating for legislation to be passed that specifically harms the big meanie transes, and how everyone who's making fun of her and her work is only doing so because she's a woman and wah. That's the thing about bullies. When you start bullying back, they're going to act like you're the asshole, even though they're the one shaking hands with Nazis. And that's my case for why, in this specific instance, it's totally cool and good to make fun of a children's author. Huh, didn't imagine saying that when I started this channel. Hey, speaking of books for young readers, why not check out this book from my buddy, Jordan Kirian, entitled Night of the Slug, the first in his planned Normal Ohio series. If you remember Goosebumps, that's kind of the vibe he's going for with short 100-page novels featuring kid-friendly campy horror. It's available on Amazon via the link below for a measly $6. Hell, $6 to support a passionate, independent, self-published artist, and it's a great present for your niece or nephew whose upcoming birthday you totally forgot about until just now? That's perfect! But is the book even good, DBiddles? What, you'd think I'd just shill out for free for my friends if I didn't legitimately dig their stuff? I'd need a whole $50 at least to help promote one of their projects if I didn't believe in what I was saying, and sadly, my subscriber count isn't yet a sound $50 investment. Look, I'll admit the first 20 to 25 pages, I was pretty lukewarm on it. It's made for kids and the horror foreshadowing wasn't yet grabbing me, so it was a bit of a slow burn. But that's how effective horror is done, and I did get slowly drawn in and was treated to a genuine little bit of reader's chills around the halfway point. You know you're doing a good job when slugs of all things are effectively scary. Slugs can't even move fast or wield chainsaws. And I'm a jaded 30-something who's watched more than a few scary movies in my time. This is prose for preteens, so you know it's gonna hit with them. Night of the Slug by Jordan Kurian, $6 on Amazon. Check it out, my dudes. And that about does it for this episode of the Brick Edition. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. I'm DBiddles, signing off from ChatBots, the Brick Edition.